Hey everyone, Jen here, and today we're going to be making the new Witch Hat Quilt Block, foundation paper piece style, but in the hoop. And if you have watched any of our other videos or used any of our other quilt blocks, this process is the same construction as those quilt blocks. This one, we're just going to be going over, the exact steps for this block. So you'll want to pull up the PDF that's included. In there, it gives a cut chart for your fabrics, and then just some general information, link back to this video and like some photos and stuff. So go ahead and pull that up. We are going to go through how to create a cut template for your three main fabric pieces. So you can utilize that for cutting down your fabrics, or you can stick to the cut chart. It's up to you. So you might want to just watch through the whole video for that. So go ahead and gather your supplies and let's get started. Okay, first up, we're going to talk about how to create a template for cutting your fabric. So if you're going to make a bunch of these quilt blocks to put into a project, this is the route I would go for this specific block. Now you can do this for all the other blocks as well. And we've talked about it with mug rugs, etc. So what you want to do is get some heavier cutaway. So this is actually a medium cutaway, but it's pretty thick and sturdy. You want to make it sturdy so that way you can hang on to it and use it over and over and over. This only takes literally less than a minute to do. And so what you want to do is you want to hoop up cutaway and then run step one, which is all the placement lines for this quilt block. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a template for the hat portion and then the two sides. So I already pre-cut the hat portion. So you can see here, the first step is going to be this triangle here. So what I did was I made two of these stitch outs. So one we're going to do for the center and one we're going to do for the sides. So if you have a Creative Grids ruler, on the ruler, it has two seam allowances. This side is a 1/2 inch, this side is a 1/4 inch. So make sure that you pay attention to which side you're using. I like to mess up a lot. So you're going to take your ruler and line up the 1/4 inch guide on the stitch line and cut down to a 1/4 inch all the way around. So now you have your template for this size block for the center of your witch hat. So this will enable you to take whatever fabric, this is just a scrap, and place your witch hat. You could even fussy cut. That way, if you have a print you want to showcase something on the hat, you can easily do that. Now, it doesn't have to be perfectly cut if you don't care about trimming in the hoop. But if you don't want to trim in the hoop, you're going to want to take your template, lay it down, and then line back up your ruler to give you a nice clean edge and cut out your witch hat. Now, obviously, I would probably do a little bit better job if I wasn't videotaping this, but I'm just gonna cut here. Okay. So now we have the center of our hat. So next, you're going to take your second template and we're going to use it for the sides. So you only need one side. And for this one, on the side that attaches to the hat, I like to add a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So again, this ruler has a 1/2 inch and a 1/4 inch. So use the 1/2 inch side and you're going to cut along the hat line. I just do it all the way down and trim. Okay, so that's a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then around the outside, I like a little bit more, but if you are trying to really save fabric, I would at minimum do a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to do 1 inch seam allowance because you do need some caught in the outer edge. And I don't mind if I lose a little bit of fabric. But again, if you're trying to be mindful of your fabric, you can cut your seam allowance as close as you feel comfortable with. Okay. So now we have the template for the sides. So again, I'm just going to take this scrap piece of fabric. I don't even know if it will fit here. It won't, but you're going to take whatever piece of fabric. Now, if it's directional fabric, you'll want to cut these separately. So you'll want to lay one side out and trim your pattern piece, then flip it mirrored and cut this side out. Now you can fold your fabric in half and you can make one cut, but if you're trying to specifically get a portion of your print, just know that this is a little harder. You can't see the other side, right? So also, if you mess up which side is what, that can happen too. So if I'm using a directional print, now this one is tossed, I'm going to line up the edge here. So I have a clean edge, thankfully, and I'm going to use my template cut. Now I could, again, if I don't care, I could just leave these top and bottom, but because we're doing a video, I'm going to trim these down. So trim, like so. Okay. And then you're going to do the other side. So you're going to take your template, flip it over. Do it this way so it's a little easier for me. I have a straight edge on the bottom also here and here. Okay, so now I have my two side pieces, my center. Okay, so you're going to follow the either use the cut chart for your witch hat band here and then the bottom background fabric here, or you can stitch out your quilt block if you want to be really tight and measure yourself. We do give a seam allowance of at least 1 inch on both of these pieces. So you'll want to cut out a strip for your brim and a strip for the background. All right, so we have all of our pieces cut and ready to go. Reminder, this is the size. We're doing the 5x5 block in a 5x7 hoop. And the stabilizer you want to use is Tear Easy by Sulky. This is hands down my favorite stabilizer to use for projects that you really need to get the stabilizer out nice and clean and easy. So it is called Tear Easy. So you'll see at the end how easy this comes out of the block. So you're going to hoop up your stabilizer. And you're going to go ahead and run step 1, which is placement stitching for the entire quilt block. All right, so I went ahead and stitched step 1, and it is a little hard to see because the stabilizer is so thin. So I did run it in black thread. So hopefully the next few steps you'll be able to see a little bit better. But obviously, if you're making your own, you want to use coordinating thread. Not that it really shows on the top, but it can show underneath. So I typically use white, light, like a light gray or cream color thread. Okay, so the first step is going to be the hat center. And because I cut this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, it should line up perfectly and you should not have to do any trimming if you use that process. You could also take a little dab of the water soluble, I think that's what it's called, but it's the kids glue stick, the one that washes out. Maybe it's just washable. So when I'm doing traditional paper piecing, I use a glue stick and I use the repositionable Scott glue stick, and I just put a little dab in the middle. You can tape if you want to, you can just leave it, but if you want it to stay, you can just put a little piece of glue. So the next step, you're going to tack the witch hat down to your stabilizer. Okay, so the center witch hat is tacked into place, and you'll notice that I did not move it down enough. So I still have a okay seam allowance, so I'm going to leave it, but make sure you try to center that really well. So the next step is going to be the left side. So it's going to go left, right, brim, then bottom background. So this is the fabric that I cut for this block, and I did do it mirrored. So you put wrong sides together. So this is wrong sides, and then cut it mirrored. So the top one is going to go on the left side. So you line it up with your witch hat fabric so you don't have to trim anything here. The next step is going to tack the left side to the witch hat. All right, so the two fabrics are attached. The next step is you're going to flip your left side over just like this. And again, you could put a little tiny dab of glue here, or tape into place or hold it, whatever your preferred method is. And the next step is going to tack this fabric all the way around the outer edge. Okay, so the left side is done. Next, I'm going to repeat the process on the right side. So you're going to take your other piece of fabric, right side down, line it up. So I'm going to go ahead and run step 5 to do the initial tack down, flip it, and run step 6 to complete the tack down. All right, so both sides are done. So next you're going to take your scissors, and I've talked about these scissors before on videos. These are just cheap kid scissors. They are the best for trimming stuff that is thin, which fabric is, and they won't cut the stabilizer or get caught up in your batting. So I highly recommend getting you some kid scissors. I bought them in bulk on Amazon for a class, and I have a ton, but you can get them at the dollar store or wherever, or steal them from your kids. Okay, so you're going to trim the bottom of the left and right side, and you want to just trim it to the seam allowance of your center hat. Now, the next 2 steps are brim and then bottom. I recommend cutting these larger. So if you're trying to do this so that you don't have to trim, it's still really hard to hold these tiny little pieces with your hands. So maybe on the larger sizes, it will be fine. But we build in a seam allowance for these, like a larger one. So you're going to take your hat, the bottom or brim, and line up the fabric right side down with your seam allowance from your other pieces here. And then step 7 is going to tack this into place. Okay, just like your other pieces, you're going to go ahead and flip the brim of the hat over. For this portion, because this is so small, I definitely recommend putting a little bit of tape here to hold it into place or at the corners before you run the next step. So the next step, step 8, is going to tack your fabric into place along the bottom here. Okay, so this is where the trimming could be a little tricky for some. So this is about a 1/2 inch. Yeah, that's about a 1/2 inch seam allowance here. So if you want to trim this to a 1/4 of an inch, which I'm going to do, I go ahead and cut off a little bit excess here. You need a 1/4 inch here, so don't trim too much. And then again, the kid scissors, they cut fabric pretty well. I'm going to go ahead and trim this down just a little bit. And if you leave this strip a little larger, it is a lot easier to trim this down. So just depends on if you're trying to save fabric or if you have minimal fabric on what you do there. Okay, so the last step is going to be the bottom background. So we're going to do the same process. Line up your clean edge here, right side down. The next step is going to go ahead and tack this at the base, and then I'm going to flip it over and finish up the tack down. All right, so our quilt block is finished, in the hoop portion. So you can see here it tacked it into place at the bottom. And then next we're going to go ahead and remove it from the hoop. And you don't want to remove the stabilizer from the interior of the block. You just want to remove it from the outer edges. And you could see how easy that stabilizer tears out. Next, you're going to go ahead and trim your seam allowance. So we're going to cut in a seam allowance. So the older blocks, and I can't remember if I did this, but I built the seam allowance into the block so you trimmed the stitching. But some of you suggested to leave the stitching and add the seam allowance after. So that's what we do. And I make a lot of projects with these blocks, and that seems to be the easier way to do this. So again, take your Creative Ridge ruler grueler, that's funny, on the 1/4 inch seam allowance side, and you're going to line up. So Creative Grid, see, it has this black line here. Here's the seam allowance. Okay, so you're going to take that black dotted line and line it up right on top of the stitching of your border, and you're going to trim at a 1/4 of an inch. So you're adding your seam allowance here, and you're going to do that on all 4 sides. This is the Olfa um, rotary cutter. I like to leave my rotary cutter open, and I've decided I had to get one that automatically closed because I've dropped it one too many times. And I think I'm just going to take a toe off at this point. All right, so last side here. Okay, so now your block is complete. So depending on your use for these blocks, here's two of them. Um, you're going to want to leave the stabilizer inside the block. So if you're going to attach these blocks together, which I did in the quilt sample that I showed using these blocks, the paper is used, or the stabilizer is used to your advantage to hold the blocks in place and your fabrics don't stretch. It also gives you the seam guide, right? So you're going to take if you were going to attach these two, you're going to take your blocks and put them right side together. And what I like to do is take your pin and put it through the corner of the stitching here, right at the corner. And then take your next pin and put it right at the corner of the other block. So I pin there. Okay, now those two blocks are lined up. You want your pin to be straight up and down, and then you know your blocks are aligned. So then I'm going to leave that in and do it on the other end also. I'm going to take my pin, put it right through the corner, and then right through this corner here. Okay, and the pin again is straight up and down, right? Okay, then I take one pin and put it through here, and that's what's going to hold your block together. You don't need these pins anymore. You could pin here. Sometimes I'll put a pin right up top here just to make sure there's no shifting. So when you take it to your sewing machine, you're going to want to sew. Even though this is going to rip out, if you were doing paper, you would use a shorter stitch length. So you would do like a 1/8 or a 1/5. But because this is stabilizer, it is going to go ahead and pull out pretty easy. I sew at 2.5, so which is like what I call like normal quilt stitch. So it's up to you, maybe a 2.5. Okay, so I use the 1/4 inch seam foot with guide 2-piece. So if you use that, it'll line up the edge of the guide to the edge of your quilt block. So you could use that. The most important thing is you want to line up your needle with either directly on top of your stitching here or one click to the left. So if you use one click to the left, make sure you use one click to the left on all of your blocks. So that way they're all exactly like uniform. Okay, so you're going to go ahead and stitch all the way down. And then once you open them up, which obviously isn't stitched, you'll have the stitching will be in your seam. And then once you put everything together, then you take out the stabilizer. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope you enjoyed my quilt. The other portion of the quilt, you'll notice there's like a half square triangle with a jelly roll. We have that coming as a quilt block in, I think, 2 weeks. So stay tuned for that and I'll see you later.